Let's do this. Thank you, Ruben. All right, so today we're going to learn the basics of CSS. I'm with my friend Ruben. He is also learning web development. We thought this would be a good opportunity to work together, kind of give a beginner mindset with my experience as well. So let's just jump right into it. Ruben, introduce yourself, and then let's do it.
Hey guys, my name's Ruben, friend of Ethan, interested in web development. I've been watching Ethan's first couple videos, the first 3 he put out. So if you haven't watched that one yet, you should watch that before this one. And yeah, just starting the web development journey, interested in the whole process.
Awesome. Thank you, Ruben. Yeah, great point. Watch those 3 videos before. That will really help you understand what we're doing and the basics of CSS. This is just an overview. Hopefully in the next video, we'll get into more advanced patterns, but this is just to kind of get you, dip your toe in into the waters of CSS. So let's begin. On this first side, what does CSS stand for? Cascading style sheet. And CSS describes the style of an HTML element, right? So this is how we write CSS. We have our selector, which would be our HTML tag. Then we have a property, which is what we are defining, what we're styling, and then the value of that property. All right, so this is a basic one where P tag stands for paragraph, essentially. And it's usually what you use for any text on a website. In HTML. Color would be the font color, and blue would be blue. So we'll quickly write that, and then I will explain why it's called cascading style sheet. So we have this setup here, which is basically a simple website with an HTML5 boilerplate with an H1 tag, and we'll write an H1 rule for this website. What do we say? We want color blue. All right, and if we save that and refresh, we can see that the color has changed. All right, so now the reason what's called cascading is that we have different rules that can go down. Now, if I rewrote color red, it gets overridden, right? Because what's on bottom actually takes priority. It is cascading down. There's different other ways to write rules that take priority over the other ones, but that is the idea, is that you can keep writing rules down, such as color green, right? CSS is cool, right? So now we'll have to see that as well. How does that sound, Ruben?
That sounds good. One thing I'll note is that we didn't, in the previous videos, we kind of started with creating. I mean, if you were just going one video to the next, you would know how to begin to do that, the HTML default on the side. But in the previous videos, we created a new file. We started with index.html. Then we created the CSS style sheet. So
that is correct. If you do need to learn how to do that, it would be good to hop into that separation of concerns video that talks about that. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, we are. We are using best practices here and separating our CSS, using this link tag, and using this style sheet. If we were to open this folder, you can see the 2 files are here. And we can split it left and right, like so. That was a little bit messy, but there you go. Cool. All right. So yeah, if you have that done, you'd be able to write these rules, and sweet. Let's go to the next slide. adding colors to our text in HTML elements. We use the color property to change text color. That's what we just showed. And we use the background color property to change the color of an element. Now, the reason I'm particularly showing these two CSS properties is it's kind of the first ones that are really easy to see the changes, color. So if we wanted to change, let's resave that, get that blue back. If we wanted to change the background color of this element to black, we would see that it covers this whole line. And we'll go over that too soon in a slide, why it is covering the entire width of the thing. Now, another thing to note is that you need to have a semicolon in between each rule that you write. Otherwise, it breaks and you'll get an error. See how now none of these rules are being applied to this H1 tag. So if you miss a semicolon, it won't apply. You don't need a semicolon on the last rule written in this selector. However, it is best practice to do it as well. That is a common bug that causes issues in CSS. Cool. Any questions, Ruben?
No questions on that front.
Cool. All right, next slide. All right, so then the next thing we would do is setting heights for these, elements. Let's change this to gray. It'll look a little bit easier to read. Yes, so every element has a height property that you can set. So if we wanted to set this to 100 pixels, or that semicolon at the end, you could see that the height has changed to 100, and we can even change the width as well. All right. Now you'll see that the letters are what we call overflowing the box of this element, and that is because we set a width and height, and our text is overflowing it. This is actually why we tend to not want to set height and width to our properties, and letting the browser do its thing and calculating it itself is a better idea. Now you might ask, why is it taking up the whole line and not just what what's inside the box? And we're going to learn that soon. Okay, right here. So each element has a display property. The main two ones that we're going to learn right now are block and inline. All right, so the display property specifies if and how an element is displayed. Right, each element has its own predetermined display property. This H1 and P tag are block, but if we were to add a span tag in here, HTML defaults, right? And we put this in here, and we wanted to see, spelling mistake. Got a little excited there. Color blue, right? You can see that it only takes up what's inside because it is a inline element. Now, let's look at this chart down below, and you can see the difference, right? A block will take up the entire width. Now, it does look a little bit misleading that it's not taking up the entire width in this image, but the idea is that a block element will take up the entire width, that therefore it'll always stack, and the inline will always go to the same line. So an inline element does not start a new line. It only takes up as much width as necessary. And a block element always starts on a new line, takes up the full width, stretches out left and right as far as it can. And we can show that again by adding another span here, and you'll see it'll be right next to each other, right? If we add another p tag here, it goes again as its own block. Any questions, Ruben?
No questions. Instead of coding along with you, I'm just paying attention to the video, and I'll sort of listen to it back after.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I actually do have a section where we can do some exercising. I put it in the slides, but maybe for this video, it could be just a good idea to just follow along.
Yeah.
And then, run it back later.
For sure.
All right, awesome. And the reason why we these elements are inline and block, as you can see down here, these user agent style sheets, and we went over these in a previous video where the browser is applying its own styles right to these elements by default, right? And if we want to override them, we have to be specific and write those in. There's this font size, which is how large the font is. If we wanted to make that smaller for all H1 elements, you see now it has been overridden by our rule. Cool. All right. This is developer tools, and the way you get that opened is by inspecting in your browser. Let's move on to the box model. Okay, so every element has the box model. Okay, so if you look at this, this is some more semantic HTML that we were talking about. There's the header tag, the nav, the section, the article, the side, the footer. And each of these boxes has a margin, border, padding, and content. So we're actually going to take a deep dive. We'll type out all these HTML elements, and then we'll set the different margins, borders, the padding, and the content, and we'll see the difference between all these properties. Another cool thing to notice is that each of these elements, if you select them, you can scroll down and you actually can see what the values are, right, in these properties. So that can be really nice when you're trying to determine that. Okay, so let's write out all those HTML elements. I'm going to delete what we have so far. And delete this CSS. I'll refresh. We should have a blank page. All right, so then we're going to start with the header. All right, and I should have Emmet. Emmet is a shortcut for writing HTML. All I have to do is type in the tag, and it will output the brackets parts, and then it will put my cursor in the middle, which makes it faster to write HTML because I don't have to write the tags. To turn on Emmet, you can look up an article to do that, but usually it is turned on by default in VS Code. A lot of ways to be efficient in web development is finding out about these tips and tricks, which basically increase development time. Think of it kind of like your shortcuts on your keyboard. When you're navigating any application, it'll help you speed up. So we're also going to actually put in content in here so we can know the difference between all of these tags. All right, so we're using, looks like 6 different tags. And once again, we are using semantic HTML instead of writing, divs everywhere. See, this will help show the difference between each element. And if you hover, you actually get the MDN reference of what this element is used for. Another reason why it's nice to use semantic HTML, right? All these have a purpose. Cool, so if we refresh that, it's gonna be pretty basic. All these elements actually don't really have much user agent styling, which will be kind of nice. It looks like they're all block, that's why they're all stacked. And then we're gonna try to set this up using our margin, border, padding, content, and our display property that we used before. Okay. It might be hard just using those, what we've learned so far, but let's see if we can do it. So we're going to select our header, and you can see this these like suggestions that have been popping up. That is due to GitHub Copilot. I'm actually going to disable that for now so that it doesn't keep doing that. But that's useful for, basically it's artificial intelligence that is helping me predefine what I'm going to type. But we're going to ignore it for now because we want to learn. All right, so the first one we're going to make green, and we'll make the color white, and we'll do that actually for all of them. And a cool way to just do this, we could just type it out like that, right? Copy them, and then boom, right? Just go down. Article, this side, and then footer, right? Now, you'll see that it all kind of looks like one big box, and that's because there's no spacing in between these, which would be our first outermost rim, which would be the margin, okay? So if we wanted to set just the margin on the header, right, we'll set the margin bottom, and we'll say 10px, right? And we'll see just 10 pixels has been spaced between each of these elements, right? All right, if we did that to all these, we would see, all right, we only did it to a couple of them. Let's do it to all of them, all right, boom, all the way down. Now we can see that there's not much room between each of these elements in the text, right? So that is the next, actually the next one is actually border. We don't typically use this for spacing. We actually use it for mostly just styling. So margin is more about the spacing in between elements. Border would be styling. So if we wanted to add a border, we would just say 1px solid black like this. Okay, now you can't really see it right on the nav because it's only 1px. So if we want to see it more, we would add 4px. Now we can see it a lot better. If we want to be really obvious, we do 10px. Now you can see how it kind of creates a spacing effect, but we really don't want to use that for spacing. We want to use that for styling. And that's because border has other properties like border radius, which you'll see in all types of websites where you can basically curve the border, all right? And if you did 50%, you would actually make a circle. All right, we're not going to do that. We're going to just keep it at 10, and you can see that how that border works. All right, then the next one we're going to do is padding. That would be the space in between the text. All right, if we do padding 10, it sets the padding for each, oh, sorry. That actually, apologies for that. I was not on that element the whole time. You can see here, it is all computated out. Each of the padding is set to 10, all right? Now you can also be specific on which padding to set. If I did 20px, refreshed, you can see over here, there's a padding of 20 on the side. Now, it didn't really make a difference because of it's a block element. But if we were to do display inline, it kind of breaks a bunch of our styling. But you can see the spacing is a little bit more obvious on the right hand side now. If I did 100, right, you could see that. All right, let's put it back to what it was, which was 100, and then we'll put this right back to that. And then the last part of the content box, or sorry, box model, no, do that. Is the content, and that's what exists inside the box, which is usually just text. All right, so if we wanted to make that bigger, essentially we're just going to increase the size of the text. Right now you can see it's 904.28. Let's see what happens if we refresh it. It's 904.55. Okay, so it keeps getting bigger. Ruben, any questions?
Yeah, what is that, the 904.55 you just referenced? What is that? Is that pixels?
Yeah.
What is that?
That's a good question. I believe it is pixels. Everything is usually default pixels. So if you actually, if you did padding 10, actually, no, it doesn't take it as a, but yeah, I believe that is pixels. And it is just calculated by the browser.
Right.
We're actually there's gonna be a next slide that kind of determines how the browser calculates the width, calculates actually these properties, not the width. Okay, so we'll see that in a second.
Okay, so that navigation text is 904, and I see you highlighted over it. We can see that blue highlight is about 904 pixels wide.
Yeah, actually, I wonder if I resize this. Yeah, you could see that it actually changes because
it changes. Right, because the actual size of the text is 48 pixels, but depending on how wide your browser is, it scales to adjust.
Yep, exactly. And that 55, you can see there's a little bit of spacing. You know, we set 48 on the font, but there's actually a little bit of spacing. And see how it's highlighted? So if we change that's because of a property called line height. And if we made it 1, I think it'll be tighter. And actually, see, now it is exactly 48.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of these properties, and that's why we're not jumping into like learning all of them, because there's
one at a time.
My guess is that there are thousands. These are the most popular ones to use for you know, all different types of styling and positioning with the display property as well. But this is just the basics, so we're not going to just jump into all the different types of properties possible. Good questions. Anything else?
No, I think that's all for me. I think the way of thinking of it as the box is helpful. You know, if we want to change the inside part of the box, we're going to have to change the layers that are outside the box, as those will be affected by the inside.
Yes, that is correct. And yeah, like I said, margin is the spacing in between each of the elements. Border would just be for styling. Padding is the spacing in between your text and the box itself. And the content is how the browser calculates the width of your content. Right. So we're not typically going to use spacing for in between, you know, these two tags. Otherwise, it would look weird, right? If I did padding bottom, like I wanted them to be 400 pixels apart. Now this whole element is large, right? We didn't want that.
Right.
We wanted the margin to, so now they're 400 pixels apart.
Right.
Now, like I said, a lot of times you're not going to set that large of a margin apart because, you know, you want it to be readable. It would be weird if you were scrolling a website and there was just like white page. So typically, you're using the same kind of spacing in between each element.
Right. You want more space in between the elements. You don't want that element just to take up more space.
Correct. Yes.
In this for this style for what we're trying to build.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, the great part about the web is you can do whatever you want, and it's up to you to decide. You can be as artistic and expressive as you want. So that is the box model. Yeah, you'll be using that all the time in web development, and we're going to learn this next thing, which is important because this is actually going to determine how your box model is calculated. Right now, a lot of people set a rule at the beginning of their website, at the top of their website, which changes the default of how your box is calculated. So let's learn the difference, and then we'll show you why people do that. So content box versus border box. All right, content box is static, and border box is dynamic. That's the way we want to think about it. So let's look at these two differences here. Back to that content area. If we were to set on a content box, which is static, the width and the height and the padding, you could see that actually the size of it isn't actually 100, right? We have an extra 20 pixels on the side because of that padding, right? If we do border box, even if we set the padding to 10, the width and the height are still respecting the rules of what we set. A little bit, it's a hard thing kind of to grasp. What we're about to look at it in the browser itself. And typically we make all border box because it makes it easier to maintain and run to less problems. Now you would ask yourself, why doesn't the browser just do it itself? That's a great question. I actually don't have the answer, but this is a rule in CSS. This asterisk means apply to every element. All right, so if we wanted to apply this to every single element, let's do 400px. Now, it might not actually work for all of them because we have margin set for all of them. Do we have margin top? Let's do that. All right, so now margin top is set for all these elements, right? If we were to do another rule. Now remember, the reason that margin bottom didn't work is we have the margin bottom set in all these and that cascading, right? These are going to override all these ones down here. If we move this to the bottom, which is not what you typically do. Sorry, save. Oh, look at that. See, I'm learning something. It actually doesn't override. I would think it would have. All right, interesting. It doesn't override. And that's probably due to another rule set in CSS. There's ways to determining which rules override and which ones don't. But as you can see, if I did margin top, which is something we didn't apply to each of these elements, you can see that they're all spaced out by 400 pixels. All right. So this is what I was saying before. We're gonna see how content box is different than border box. All right. So we're gonna set box sizing. And the reason I'm teaching this, and it seems like a little bit advanced, is that a lot of these websites set this early on. So if you don't know the difference, it can be like, why isn't my element respecting my rules that I'm setting? Sorry, I'm just like getting confused as I talk. All right, so let's take, for example, this navigation element that we've been working on. It says right now, so now every element is box size and border box. All right, let's actually see what happens if we change that. Did anything change? No, because we haven't set the width and height. All right, so let's set the width and height, and we'll do 400px by 400px. Hopefully that'll be nice and obvious. All right, a nice big square. All right, so right now it's a border box, and we can see that the content inside is 360, 360, because we're border box and it's dynamic. Now let's change it to content box. And now the content box is respecting the rules that we just set of width and height. See the difference? Let's go back, we'll do it again. Border box, 360, 360, because it's calculating that you want your total element, right, to be 400 pixels, right? If we hover this, we can see that it says nav and then 400 by 400 right above, right there, right here. All right, if we change this to content box, we can see that that is 440 by 440 because we set the padding, all right, and the border as well. If we had all those off, right, I believe this would still be 400 by 400, all right, even with the content box, because we don't have those other elements, other properties resizing it. So that's why people apply this box sizing border box. Therefore, they don't have to think of when they set the width and height. They don't want to set the width and height for the content. They actually want to set the width and height for the entire element. Let's refresh that just to get our original properties back. Ruben, any questions?
Yeah, I think I understand it. It basically seems that border box, when you set something, that the rule will help it will help it remain similar to the other elements, whereas if you were doing the content box, you would have to then adjust the other elements so that it is similar in style.
Yeah. Now, you were using the word elements. You want to use the word properties when you're talking about CSS. Okay. Elements would be referring to tags, HTML tags.
I see. Okay, so properties in CSS and elements for HTML.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct, but you had the right idea. Keep in mind, border box is dynamic, content box is static. So when we set right, so when we set the width and height on the border box, right, the entire box is being calculated for 400 px, right? But when we put it to content box, only the content, right? The content box is changed. We're setting the width and height to that, but border box is the entire element. So that's why people use it, because when they want to set width and height, they want to be specific, right? They don't want to set the content. They want to set the actual entire element. That way they can be, as accurate as possible, right? Otherwise, yeah, like you said, we'd have to think through, like, oh, we want it to be 400 pixels, but we're off, right? Because of those other properties, those 440, we would have to decrease this, to 380.
Right. You'd have to change all the other, you'd have to change the padding and the border and the margin.
Right, now we have to think, now we're at 420. Okay, I still have to go down, right?
Because we want it to be 400 total, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah, I mean, it seems in broad strokes that the border box is a better default. I guess I would need a specific instance as things get more complicated of why I would go with a content box.
Right, and maybe, you'll see in all these websites, we could go to any website, choose one of your liking, Reddit, and it'll go. Oh, those are up. But yeah. Okay, cool. Let's take it to the next slide. We have the next property we want to go over is position. There are three main positions that we're going to focus on, and then there's 2 more after this, but on the slide, we're going to focus on these. All elements are position static by default. And what that means is that they are in order of where they're put in the document, all right? So in this HTML file, this document, right? They're all respecting the natural flow of the browser, right? If I were to set the position of this to 9 static, right? Nothing's going to change, right? On that header, right? It's already positioned static by default, right? But there is a position relative, is position to its normal position. Now, if you set all of them, now if you set this relative, it still wouldn't change anything because the whole entire document is normal. So it's not going to change anything. But if I were to change it to absolute, which is position relative to the nearest position ancestor, which would be the body tag, the parent tag, absolute. All right, now you could see the entire element has lost its width, right? It no longer goes across. The navigation has gone, like, overlapped it, and that's because it's position absolute. It's completely removed from the document, and we could set this to be like in a weird position like this. All right, now the reason we brought up that relative, you thought, why is relative and static kind of seem the same, right? Right before we change those. And the reason is, if we had another element inside here, let's just say we had a p tag, and we said we want to change this to be absolute, but we wanted the header to be static, like it, or relative, right? And then we selected that p tag inside the header, and this is just saying for all p tags inside the header, right? Just like our over here, see how it's showing us a preview of the header inside the p tag. If I did position absolute here, you'll see that the entire header is now a block element, but that p tag is out of position within that relative element, right? If I move this here, you'll see that actually, interesting enough, yeah, that actually doesn't, it's still relative actually to what's inside here. Actually, it shouldn't be doing that, right? If I did board, yeah, right, okay. So if I did bottom, this will be to the entire document. But if I change this to relative, it'll be inside that element, all right? See, it's only the bottom of, oh wait, sorry. Now this is kind of a harder one to grasp. As you can see, like it kind of like disappeared, right? Because it's inside of this, and we put bottom 40px, and you can't even see it. It's actually like off the page, right? If we wanted it back on the page, let's see, let's do top. Let's put that, right, okay, it's right there, right? Let's get rid of this bottom one. This is kind of advanced CSS, and honestly, sometimes hard to show beginners because it's kind of abstract in some ways, these rules. But the reason you have to show it is because this position does come up a lot in CSS. And if you're not taught it at the beginning, it can be kind of like a mind blown later on. I wouldn't worry about it too much making complete sense right now, because most of the time you actually don't need to set positions, and you're kind of just letting the document work how it's supposed to. like that is the p tag just normally inside the header tag. Ruben, any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's definitely it's advanced. I guess the only thing was there was for a bit there while you were making it absolute versus relative, and the actual word absolute was showing, but I thought absolute was sort of a rule. So why was it being displayed as like a text?
I put the absolute inside that p tag
okay.
yeah, to help you see it and to help you realize that tag was absolute.
So I see.
Thank
So
you
you
for
were
calling
putting
that
the rule.
out. Yeah,
you were putting the rule absolute on within the text
on
of
the
the p tag.
Yeah,
I see. Okay.
Yeah, to help you see. Apologies for not explaining that.
No, that makes sense.
Good quote. That's a good question, though. Right. If you had to put blue, it's a little easier to see. Yeah, inside there. Cool. Yeah, like I said, a little abstract. It's just the idea that you kind of need to know about it. Not going to come up a lot, but it's good to just know that it's there. And let's just remove all those there. Okay, we have two more positions. Position fixed. It'll be relative to the viewport, which means it always stays in the same place, even if the page is being scrolled. All right, so if we did position fixed here on the header, you'll see it's just scrolling with the navigation. A lot of times you see these on headers on websites so that the user can always navigate wherever they're going. And then there's position sticky, which is almost similar to fixed, except it'll only be for that particular section. All right. So if we were to add a p tag inside of here and call it sticky, all right, we'll do the same thing I just did inside here. And the reason I'm putting it in here is because there's space in here, and you'll see why that matters. All right, and we do this, and you have to apply a position rule. All right, let's see. You'll see. We need more. Let's just give this a really tall space. All right, and see how the sticky is staying there. But as soon as we get, I did a little bit too much, probably. I'm gonna scroll down forever. Let's just do that. That should be enough to demonstrate, right? All right, as soon as we get out of that area, it should stop. Let's add a little bit more height to another element so that we more to scroll. See how it went away, but the header is still there because it's fixed to the entire viewport, but the sticky element is only fixed to the position of the element it's in. All right. Again, these are kind of more advanced, but you see these a lot in websites, and you'll probably want these at some point later on down the road, and it's just good to know that they are available. Let's put this back. And let's remove position sticky. All right, everything is now back to normal, and we'll remove that p tag from the navigation. All right, any questions?
No, I think that one makes a little bit more sense. I think the comparing it to nav bars on websites is helpful because that is often the case. You're scrolling down, but that the nav bar will stay on the top. Sometimes it will thin as you get further down if they want to display more of the content on the page. But that one makes sense. Yeah,
those rules have kind of a little bit better names. I think these rules are kind of a little bit more abstract.
Yeah.
And like I said, you're actually going to use these position fixed and sticky probably more than you would relative or absolute. So it's always good to know. All right, so then the next thing, we only have a couple more slides. We'll zoom through them. We have CSS Units. We've been using Pixel, and it's the most popular because it's absolute length. All right, we've been setting that for all of our widths and our padding and our font size and our borders, all right? But there are also other relative lengths, and we have EM, REM, VW, VH, and percentages, all right? All right, so we can look down at this chart. EM is relative to the font size of the elements, all right? So if we change the font size, this is 48, and we do EM, so it'd be 400 times 48. So you can imagine this is going to be really big, right? Really big, right? But if we were to change this to just 1 pixel, it's only going to be 400 times 1. So it'll go back to that 400 that we had earlier. EMs can be popular for spacing mechanics, right? If we set the font size, actually, yeah, the font size to here to 16px, which is pretty popular. And we start changing, you know, the right here, it would be 16 times that, all right, times that parent, times the parent. Now, it's actually kind of confusing because this is relative. There's also REM, which is relative to the root, right? So right now it did apply to that, the 16px applied to this in this case. But if I had set the font size to here to 24, this would be, it would be referencing this font size and not this font size, this REM. But if I change to REM, it'd be to the root, it'd be to this font size. And we could probably show that better by doing this 1, right? It'll go back to 16. If I change this back to EM, it'll do the 400 times 24, right? Then we have percentages. All right, so that's just the percentage of the browser. So if we just did 40%, it would just be about, you know, 40% of the width and the height. Interesting enough, it doesn't do the total browser amount. It would just be the total. It actually doesn't do anything, right? Because there is a reason behind that, and honestly, I'm not quite sure why. But the width is set, and I believe it's because the content, right? It's taking up 100%. It'll always take up. Let's see if it can go below. If I did 0%, no. Okay, I'm actually not sure why that works that way. So I also have things to learn. Relative to VW would be relative to 1% of the viewport's height. So that would be this whole entire browser. If we were to set this navigation to 40VH, then it would be 40% of that. You can see when I resize this, if I can grab the edge of this, it's resizing, right? Very cool. And same thing with this, right? If I were to resize this, 40V, oh, right, that's viewport height. I meant to do VW, viewport width, all right? Then it changes with the width. And that helps with responsiveness, right? Because everyone has different size browsers, you know, mobile and stuff. So a lot of times you'll set this VH or VW if you need some responsive tricks. All right, we're gonna skip the exercise. We've been exercising this our entire time. There's 2 more CSS layout rules. We're not gonna go too much in detail, but I just want you to know that they're aware of them, just because they're pretty much advanced. And for this tutorial, I think we should leave them for the next video. But the general rule of thumb is we use flex is used when content is fluid or we think it's going to change, and grid is used when content is static or we think it's not going to change, all right? So let's just think of this first layout module, flex. Makes it easier to design flexible, responsive layout structures. In order to use flex, we must create a flex container. All right, that would be the parent element. And then each of these elements would follow the rules of the flex. If we just wanted to see it really quickly, let's put this back. I think that's because, yeah, all these were different heights because of that font size change. Right, if we wanted to make this, the body right here is the parent element. If we added display flex, you would see, actually, see now everything is stacked this way. Right, because now they have a rule that's set that way. And then grid makes it easier to design multiple dimensional layouts. In order to use grid, we must create a grid container. It is the same idea. You would be setting grid. And actually, I think it is, in this case, nothing gets applied because we didn't apply any rules. If we were to do one FR, you'd see it being stacked like this, right? There's two columns in this case. Now, these are just, there's a lot to learn about these properties, and that's why we're not going to go into too much detail. But an overview of what we just learned, the basics of CSS. CSS is a large language with a ton of properties. Don't expect to get it right away. You're going to have to practice. And in the next video, we will go over kind of these two layout modules in a lot more detail so that you can really build websites exactly how you want. Ruben, any more questions? Otherwise, I think we can wrap up this video.
Yeah, final question is more of just a comment, but it seems like in large part, many of the different things we learned, there's sort of two sides to it. There are the properties that you enter them in, you enter the values as they are. And then if you want to change other aspects, you just have to change those property values and change how they look, versus the other side of it there are ways to enter in properties where they'll be automatically relative to other properties, and they'll adjust and scale depending on the rule.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
It's kind of a broad strokes. Obviously, when it gets down to the minutia, the rule might not always apply.
Yeah, and these like parent element layout rules, this flex and grid, these are super popular ways to set how the elements are going to be displayed, especially in modern days. But back in the day, before we had flex and grid, because they're actually pretty new, we did rely a lot more on these positions. Displays. All right. So it's important to know them, because the reason any of these actually work with these rules of display flex, you can see they just all got overwritten by this display rule, is because of how display inline and display block works. Right. A little advanced, but I do appreciate you following along.
Yeah.
And like I said, in the next video, we'll kind of dive more deeper into these layout modules. But it's a lot to take in. And like I said, practice. Really helpful to just play around. As you can see at some points, even I, on that percentage thing over here, like I didn't understand why height is not being respected. So there are things I have yet to learn about the mysteries of CSS. But if you continue to practice, if you continue to do exercises like this, I can promise you that you'll get really good, and you'll be able to make really cool layouts however you'd like.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, pleasure. We'll talk to you soon.